Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Wednesday, September 27th. Thank you for joining us. This is our first Awake Illinois live stream across a multitude of platforms. So we have Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about sex ed opt-out, parent tools, and some civic updates. So I am Shannon Adcock, president of Awake Illinois, and glad to be with you today. So this stream will be available on our blog along with all of the slides that I'm going to try to go through pretty quickly. But if you're on Facebook or YouTube, you can comment and you can ask questions, and we'll try to interact with you as we move along here. But we basically want to update you on what was covered in the blog post about some of the sex ed opt-out analysis that was published per the Illinois State Board of Education comprehensive sex ed survey. So basically, superintendents and district administrators were able to give updates to the community via this report. And because it was a little bit limited, we actually did a Freedom of Information Act request to get some more data. So we're going to go through this at a pretty good clip, but again, it'll be available for you to look at later at our blog. So thanks for joining us. If you're on, I see some people are on, if you can just comment that you see and hear everything okay, just to make sure there aren't any technical difficulties, and we'll work through them as we move along. So just let us know if you're here. And okay, I see thumbs up. Good. All right. So we're going to go through this. Again, the slides will be available. All right. Thank you, Melanie. The slides will be available and you'll be able to share this, review it, go back and look at it. This is basically a combination of the blog post and also of a presentation I gave last week in Markham, thanks to Pastor Cesar LaFleur and some amazing, strong pastors in Black communities in Chicago and across the country, some phenomenal advocates, Latasha Fields, Devin in the south side of Chicago, GOP, so many amazing people, Stephanie Trussell, and I was humbled and honored to join them at this summit, where we're basically talking about setting things right and coming together with solutions to protect children and to live by faith and to do right in our community. So this is kind of a combination with some add-ons of both the blog and that presentation. So basically, we want to empower you to stand in the gap between your child and indoctrination or grooming harmful agendas. So we're going to go through this, like I said, at a pretty good clip, and hopefully you'll find it beneficial. So I think it's important for people to know that parental rights are not granted to you by politicians or permitted. These rights are fundamental, and they're actually protected under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment that says you have the fundamental right to direct the care, the upbringing, and the education of your children. So don't let anybody make you apologize for that. That is a fundamental right, and we want to empower you to practice those rights respectfully for your children. It's so very important for parents to put the opt-out requests in writing to your children's school and staff. And I think that some people just assume that, staff understands your family's values or your expectations on any number of things, particularly comprehensive sexual education. So whatever it is with your expectations, don't just presume that it's understood that you would, of course, want to opt your child out of harmful gender ideology discussions in kindergarten. Unfortunately, there is an ethos right now in society, and it could be held by some teachers, where it is a noble cause to tell children that they indeed are born into the wrong body. So it's really important that if you are in conflict with that teaching, that you put your opt-out request in writing, and that is actually permitted here in the state of Illinois, and it is your right. So I think to go through, how all of these agendas are implemented, we have to ask the question, is Illinois education making the grade? Because people see this infusion of so many different superfluous curricula, and one could say, well, maybe it's because we are at 95% literacy in our Illinois schools. Well, unfortunately, as WirePoints has very prudently dissected this data that's published through the Illinois State Board of Education, statewide, this is a report card that WirePoints published, and it shows that Illinois students are indeed struggling. Just 30% of students can read at grade level, and just 26% of students can do math at grade level. And these were widely circulated, even broken down by district during the local elections when people were running for school board. And this is something that a lot of parents have very real concerns about. Taxpayers have very real concerns about. We, of course, want to see children succeeding academically. So if they're not, the focus should be to make sure that they are literate, right? And that they are prepared for a career path later in life. But we're seeing an infusion of some harmful agendas. Another superfluous form of the curricula that has a lot of dollar signs attached to it is social emotional learning, and that is an acronym SEL. And you're seeing this across the country, and it sounds very noble. And years and years and years ago when it first started, I think that it was less harmful and less bloat on the school day where teachers have a lot to teach, right? And Chicago Public Schools, through Courage as a Habit and EPIC, they put together this really interesting graphic where in 2010, you see the math proficiency in Chicago Public Schools was 79%, reading proficiency, 70%, with a budget of $4.48 billion. And they put in the curricula this concept that social emotional learning will improve student outcomes. We're going to talk about feelings, and we're going to talk about mental health and identity. And when you look at how the budget for social emotional learning and equity, which we know has now been, totally, the jig is up on that, right? People know that that is just race hustling with a lot of dollars attached to it. Both of those programs have a budget of $30 million for this school year. And look at the proficiencies from 2021. Math is at 17%, reading is at 21%, with a budget of $6.37 billion. Math and reading are down, the budget is up. So parents are concerned, what are you actually teaching then? If you're failing on literacy and math, why are you adding in with so many dollar signs attached SEL and equity? Shouldn't we get these kids proficient? I think that many would argue they will feel much better about themselves socially and emotionally if they in fact are literate and have graduated high school literate. And now through all of the lockdowns that were pushed by teacher unions and partisan interests, mental health is now where you're seeing a lot of bloat and a lot of resources being pushed into public schools with a lot of dollars attached to it. So if you're interested in getting some more background on social emotional learning, at this slide, when you go to our blog post, you'll be able to click that podcast. That's from my friend, Dr. James Lindsay, The Dialectic of Social Emotional Learning. It really gives you a great glimpse into what this programming is all about and the harmful sort of ethos and ideology that's attached to it, and why our children really don't have time for this bloat in the classroom. I mentioned teacher unions. These articles, when you see these arrows, you can click on the slide afterwards. It just shows the hypocrisy of the political agenda of the Chicago Teacher Union, where you have the leaders of the union sending their children to private school, while meanwhile, in the same breath, they're talking about how they want to kill the Invest in Kids Act and the opportunities for low-income minority children to have access to improved education opportunities. And so it's worth looking at the backstory on some of the teacher union leadership in districts like Chicago Public Schools, so you guys can read that later. The one unifying issue, and this is the good news, is that across the country, the sexualization of children is bringing so many communities together, and it's bringing people of a variety of different political viewpoints together. It's bringing backgrounds of a variety of different parents together, and this is happening nationwide. So at awakeil.com/opt-out, that's actually our most visited page with thousands of visitors each month. And I think the reason is that parents have awakened to the need to indeed be the barrier between their children and any harmful agenda that could be in conflict with your family's values or your expectations for them at school. And so this is a unifying issue. People feel more that they have more permission to bring this issue up because it's a great common denominator among parents. Do not sexualize our children. So the top issue that we have tackled over the last couple of years, along with many other concerned parents and communities, is the National Sex Education Standards. Now, these were developed by radical sex activists, and they were signed into Illinois law by Governor Pritzker in August of 2021. And it's worth noting that it was solely voted for by Democrats. So school boards will vote on whether or not to adopt this curricula, but I think it's important to recognize the need to opt out across the board because teachers could very well utilize these resources, whether it's printouts, books, videos, slides, that could really incorporate any matter of this, quote, health and sexuality agenda that has permeated public education. So it's important for you to opt out, even if your district hasn't formally opted in to the national sex education standards. So at Awake Illinois, we are very grateful that really wonderful advocates have ensured that our platform is available to you and to your community. And I think that some people, when they see a wrong being done to their child or in a district and they have questions, they just want us as the leadership team or as chapter chairs to be the ones to come in and save the day. And that's not really how this works. Grassroots is meant to empower you, the parents, to be involved and invested. So the question that we want you to ask is what are the personal health and safety and sexual education curricula and resources, third-party external resources that are being used at your child's school? You should be asking this question, and you should be very intentional in doing your research on it. So the Freedom of Information Act requests that survey, the responses, there is a column where schools can list what resources they have used. Maybe it's Lurie Children's Hospital, which, we can go down that road later, but very radical lessons being provided and resources being provided, telling children they're born into the wrong body. It could be SECUS, it could be Advocates for Youth. So it's really important that you review the curriculum to have an education on the education that your children are getting. So take a look at that and make sure you review it. You have every opportunity and right to, and opt out if you so choose. So the sample lessons of comprehensive sexual education, Advocates for Youth falls in line with the national sex education standards, and they have been adopted by some Illinois school districts. And I think that some parents have very real concerns over the youngest of students that are going to be perhaps exposed to these lessons. So I would like to show you the kindergarten, first and second grade lessons that could be utilized in a classroom. So I'm not going to read the actual words. I think that, it could potentially get us removed from YouTube. So I'm going to let you read this slide, but this would be introduced to 5-year-olds. And it's a very graphic exercise in very specific body parts. It's titled Understanding Our Bodies, the Basics. And again, it shows that it's for kindergarten, and it shows the teacher supplies and materials needed. I really want parents to see this, because if this is not something you want your child to be engaged in with boys and girls together in a kindergarten classroom, this is why you would do the opt-out. The language that they use here is very interesting. So let's read what they say. They say, you will notice that this lesson refers to girls and boys and male and female. When identifying body parts, lessons in higher grades use more precise language and begin to introduce a broader concept of gender. This lesson does, however, acknowledge that there are some body parts that mostly just girls have and some parts that mostly just boys have. Being a girl or a boy doesn't mean you have to have those parts, but for most people, this is how their bodies are. So this is the beginning of gender ideology discussions with children as young as 5. And you're seeing this conversation happen across the country, right? Where parents do not lean into this confusing conversation happening with young children. That is where the home is paramount. And unfortunately, some public schools have taken it upon themselves to be mentors on children's sexual identities as young as 5. So again, if you're in conflict with this concept and your school district has adopted the national sex education standards, submit the opt-out forms. In first grade, they start exploring gender roles, and they incorporate and suggest a book called My Princess Boy. This is again leaning into this gender ideology concept, which is a total con, by the way. I love My Princess Boy. You can read the concept that's displayed in this particular book. So if you are against this gender ideology infusion in a child as young as 5 and 6, please opt your child out and use the forms that we'll get into later. Second grade lesson, you can read the terms there. That is one of the lessons with Post-it notes, again, in a combined classroom, boys and girls together. Seven-year-olds are instructed to read the name of the body part out loud and place the label on the diagram of the body. Understanding our bodies, again, more Post-it notes. It's just going through what this lesson would do. Imagine if that is your child holding that term on a card or on a piece of paper. If you do not agree with this, opt out. So this is a very good question that people are asking. Why is this agenda in the schools? And it can really be broken down quite simply in two words: activism and profit. So a sexualized child is controllable and it's highly profitable. How is that? Well, if you look at the activism of Advocates for Youth, it tells you everything that they stand for in their About page. So it's actually activism of the sexual left. There's a highly political agenda to this organization, and it is part of the National Sex Education Standards. So look at that first sentence. Advocates for Youth envisions a society in which all young children are valued, respected, and treated with dignity. Sexuality is accepted as a healthy part of being human, and youth sexual development is normalized and embraced. And so I think that if you look at this, in some part it sounds noble, but then as you get into the 3 R's and it talks about evaluation of systems, policies, and programs, you as the parent have to be very intentional in knowing what these resources are all about and where they may find their way into your classroom. And if you're in conflict with this, you have every right to opt out. So profit, this is a huge part of the conversation across the country because there is a huge profit made when people decide to transition medically. So irreversible damage by Abigail Schreier talks a lot about this social contagion of transitioning, but there's actually a big pharmaceutical and medical profiteering industry behind it. And so if you look at how many hundreds of thousands of dollars are attached to a patient that could opt for this medical misadventure known as transitioning, and there are so many detransitioners out there sounding this alarm. Harmeet Dillon is representing many of them. These people have been irreparably harmed mentally, physically, and nobody should want that for their child. But there's a big profit to be made. In this article, you can click through it when you go through the slides. It connects to this particular article. It's worth reading. It's pretty short, and you can share it with people. Tablet Mag has published this. Jennifer Billick has rightfully labeled this the sexual synthetic identity industry. And she actually covers how Governor Pritzker and the Pritzker family is tied to this industry. So take a look at that and read it when you can. So here's the survey. It's a comprehensive personal health and safety and sexual health education report. And this just came out in August. And it came from Dr. Tony Sanders, who's now the state superintendent of education. And it's worth noting, again, Wire Points highlighted how when Tony was appointed to this role, he came from Elgin U46, where only 1 in 10 minority students in that district could read at grade level. So yeah, he's now the State Board of Education superintendent. So it was sent from him to some politicians, House Minority Leader, Senate President, Senate Minority Leader, and Speaker of the House. I'm pointing out that Tony McCombie and John Curran were sent this memo too, and they actually voted against this particular bill that implemented the National Sex Education Standards. But I've seen a lot of disappointment from people that they haven't really followed up on this or had any, commentary to make on this report. And we have concerns too. And I think people are right when they highlight, that, Tony and John actually took money from the teacher unions. So perhaps that could be why they are quiet. And it's important to note, Tony took $119,000 as of last committee report from the expenditures from the Illinois Education Association called IPACE. It's a lot of money. Also, John Curran took $20,000, not as much as Tony, but you have to wonder, is the financial gain of leaning into the teacher union's political agenda why they are so quiet? That's a little bit of information about IPACE. Becky Pringle is the head of the National Education Association. She made $500,000 while fighting for COVID school closures. So take a look at that article. It's important to know who these people are and how they could be affecting policy and the legislators behind these legislative bills that brought the National Sex Education Standards into law. So here's the good news about the report. 2021 to 2022 advocacy did work. Many of you in your communities appealed to your local school boards and said, we do not want this in our schools. And it worked. And we know that because the majority of schools and school districts have not adopted the national sex education standards. So good job, you guys. Pressure works, transparency works, respectfully advocating your voice indeed works. So keep it up. So we did this Freedom of Information Act request because we saw our policymakers, Tony McCombie, John Curran, they weren't making any commentary or really asking any specific questions. So we FOIA'd for it to get a list of the districts that have adopted comprehensive sexual education, to get a breakdown of how many students have been taught these lessons, how many were opted out. And you can see that thousands and thousands of students were exposed to these radical lessons. So it really highlights the need for continued parental rights empowerment and opt-out awareness in your community. So spread the word and share these slides, share this recording, and empower people to know what they can do if they are in conflict with these teachings for their children. Now, the Chicago Public Schools, the largest school district in the state, thousands and thousands of students, they reported, and you have to take them at their word, this survey was done over the summer, that 0 students have opted out of comprehensive sexual education or health safety education. We've done a supplemental FOIA direct to Chicago Public Schools to see if that is indeed what the reality is. We find it hard to believe that out of all those thousands of students, nobody opted out. But at any rate, this is what the report showed. So 0 CPS students, according to Chicago Public Schools, opted out of comprehensive sexual education. So the top opt-in districts, the districts that have adopted these radical national sex education standards: Chicago Public Schools, Oswego 308, Springfield 186, Peoria 150, and Evanston 65. So that's resulted in 287,472 kids that were unprotected from these radical lessons, just in these 5 districts alone, and less than 245 opted out in these 5 districts. The top opt-out districts, they are Jersey 100, East Prairie 73, Des Plaines 62, and Hazel Crest 152.5. And so if you're in this district and you opted out, please contact us, because we'd be curious to know if this district was extremely transparent in their opt-out policy, or perhaps you had some other motivations to opt out. So contact us and let us know. We'd be curious to know what was happening in your district to motivate you. So here's the takeaway: 479,045 Illinois students did not opt out according to this survey, and it was limited. Not every school district was listed, even those that claimed to have responded to the request, including Naperville District 203 and a district in Palatine. So, and we know that they've been utilizing some of these radical resources. So it's up to you, the parents, to ask good questions. But we're concerned because of all of these students, how many of these children were told that they are born into the wrong body? How many were told that puberty blockers are an ethical form of medicine? And how many were exposed to radical sex activism and discussions? So our goal at Awake Illinois is to see an increase in these numbers of students opting out and parents submitting those opt-out forms to opt out of the radical comprehensive sexual education. This is over the next 3 years. So the State Board of Education is going to be asking school districts these same survey questions over the next 3 years. And we hope to see an increased trend as more parents become aware of what's incorporated in these lessons, and if they're in conflict with them, to opt out. So where are the opt-out forms? They're at awakeil.com/forms, and there are 3 top forms that we have suggested. So the first one is Liberty Counsel, and this form is really to put the school on notice regarding what you believe is or is not acceptable for your child in regards to issues as described. It could be sex ed, sexuality clubs, sexuality discussions, Planned Parenthood, and other activist initiatives or agendas. The second form is a pronouns gender counselor discussion opt-out, and that's from Courage as a Habit. This form requests notification from the school if your child requests different pronouns or communicates or exhibits behaviors akin to gender dysphoria. And so the whole reason this is important is because, you know, we firmly believe that it is your fundamental right as parents to be involved in these conversations and in these situations with your child. And unfortunately, there is this ethos that all parents hate their children and that all parents are bigoted and that all parents are going to reject their child. That is an extremely harmful assumption. And so we encourage you to put forth your expectations that your rights will be respected when it comes to that topic with your child. And then the third one is a survey questionnaire opt-out form from Courage is a Habit. They have some really great tools at that website, but this form affirms that you do not consent to school-based surveys or questionnaires or any number of topics without express parental permission. And so we have seen Panorama, we've seen a lot of different data harvesting efforts. So if your kid has a Chromebook and they have a student ID, they're basically wearing a digital backpack that could harvest their data, could be used by any number of third parties. And if you don't want those invasive questions asked about mental health, about drug use, about political ideology, etc., this is a good form to have on file for your children. That's the website for the forms. And this is what we've been asking people, what comes to a teacher's mind when they see your student's name on the roster? So if they're going to say, okay, John Smith, Jane Smith, what do they think? Do they have any concept that you are an involved parent? Are you just dropping your kid off? Goodbye, I don't need to know who the teachers are. I don't need to know anything about the curriculum. Or does the teacher know that you're an involved and invested parent? I think that this is something that you have to think about. What does the teacher think about my child and my engagement in their education? So ask yourself that question. And here are some considerations. Are parents and guardians known to the school staff? They should be. The onus is on you, the parents, to be the primary caregiver and guardian of your children, full stop. It's not government. Who is sending emails to teachers? So is it just you? Is it just mom? Is it just dad? Is it both mom and dad? All of our communication regarding our students is signed Shannon and John. Shannon and John Adcock, right? We are both involved in our children's education. And I think that the more home-based parents and guardians that are involved in children's education, the better everyone will be. Did you submit the opt-out forms? And are parents asking questions about the curriculum discussions? This tool that you can click back to school, it's another tool from Courage is a Habit. It kind of goes through how you can have fruitful conversations with school staff based on where you are in advocacy and involvement. It's a really good tool. And we've found that when parents submit these opt-out forms and they express, what their expectations are, and they have a two-way dialogue with school teachers, with staff, that it results in really positive conversations. And so I think that when teachers see an invested and involved parent, that's huge. It makes their job easier, and it makes it a more fruitful experience for your child's academic journey. So don't hold back. We see really, really good results from this. And we hope that more and more people will be intentional in submitting these forms and having those conversations. So intentional fathers are joining the parental rights movement in greater numbers in Illinois and talking to other advocates in other states across the country. This is a very significant trend, and it's worth sharing that the majority of Awake Illinois leaders are men, and that the majority of our donors to our charitable organization are men. And I've talked to a number of people about this, and there's a pretty good notion as to why that is. Where Awake Illinois launched and a lot of grassroots efforts launched, it was really through the COVID mandates and fighting those mandates, and of course seeing need to improve public education and improve academic outcomes. But that took up a big chunk of time. And we found that, usually it fell on the mom. It fell on the mom to be at the barricade to fight those fights. And I've been fortunate to meet many of them along the way. But, the dad still is a primary care or income earner in majority of American homes. Had to work. Perhaps they had a super woke COVIDian employer, and so they couldn't really be as vocal about the masks or the medical apartheid of forced vaccines. And so it really did fall on largely stay-at-home parents and mostly moms. But now we're seeing a shift where, as those mandates have fortunately fallen here in Illinois and haven't come back, this concept of child advocacy and largely surrounding this profiteering industry of gender ideology, this is where you're seeing the dads really step up. And I think that this is across the country where more intentional fathers are speaking out and saying, you know what, my son or daughter is going to have a a personal space of a bathroom or a locker room that will maintain biological truth, right? And sports, same thing. And not wanting any of this gender confusion infused into the curricula, just please stick to the academics. That's what we're seeing a lot of intentional fathers speaking up against, and it's really good to see. So keep it up, dads. We're seeing churches and faith leaders are really taking an opportunity to empower their congregants on opt-out and parental rights resources. So perhaps it's in conflict with your religious tenet, or you just see that it is not following biblical truth, whatever it is, churches and faith leaders have a very real opportunity to talk about this to their parishioners and to families. Some considerations if you attend a church or a religious institution: are your pastors or faith leaders preaching from the pulpit that God doesn't make boys and girls wrong? Are parents walking in faith, talking to their children about sex and about values, or are you just going to defer all of that responsibility to social media, to government, to schools, etc.? And will churches boldly speak out about these harmful agendas? We hope that they will. And this video is a video that I've suggested before. It's called Help, I'm Horny, and it's from the perspective of a Black pastor who speaks truth and speaks in a way that's very relatable to teens, and it's rooted in the Bible. So you can click that when you get to the slides when we post them later if you'd like to take a look at that. Some civic updates. So we are still in the midst of launching a renewed grassroots civic leader platform. So the chapters will be by county. And right now, I know some people are looking to support petitions for those running for office. We have the primary coming up in the spring of 2024. So mark the date, March 19th. Illinois general primary is Tuesday. You can go to awakeil.com/civic to join a county chapter and to get involved at the county level. We are a registered civic organization with the State Board of Elections, so we can do grassroots civic empowerment. We can register people to vote. We can door knock. We can do all of those good things that get people involved in civic duty. So we hope that you will consider that. Oh yes, next week. So next week is apparently book banning week. I'm sure you're going to see some headlines about this, and we've actually posted on social media that we've posted this question: have you asked for a library to add a book to the catalog and they've refused? So we've seen several documentation incidents where this has happened, and where the librarian has said, no, we're not going to allow that book to circulate. But in the media, you've seen mostly this concept that parents and community members are anti-LGBTQ and bigots, and it's created this horrible, inflammatory rhetoric that's limited the conversation on, are we going to be inclusive of a multitude of perspectives and books in the library? And so we're going to be showing next week some situations that really show that only the left is banning books, particularly leftist librarians who are ideologues and don't want to see the plethora or an opposing viewpoint in the library catalog. So if that has happened to you, share with us the documentation. We'll highlight it next week. So there you have it. Protect your kids, preach the truth, share our resources, and get involved. Awakeil.com. Do you guys have any questions on that? Oh, ignore and report her. Oh, somebody being snarky. Any questions, you guys? Let's see. I'm going to close this out. What questions do you guys have? And I'll post them up here. Clear sound. Oh, that's good. Hopefully did the sound stay the whole time? We got through this in 34 minutes. It's pretty good. So these slides will be made available at the blog. You guys can share them. Those links are active. And I hope that more and more people are going to share this information with their peers, with their fellow parents. Oh, okay, that's a good question. Here, let me show that. So when the school rejects the opt-out forms, next steps. I haven't heard of a full rejection of the opt-out forms. What I have heard is that they may not find a alternative curricula to any manner of topics or discussions to which you want to opt out. And that's absolutely understandable. So what we have seen with our children and with many other families is that those students who have opted out will go to, for example, the library or to study hall. They can do their homework, and there's a monitor there while they are removed from that classroom discussion to which you have opted out. It's been great to see, our kids have come home with, limited to no homework some nights because they get it done when they have been opted out of a topic that we as the parents are intentional with at home, and it's guided within our family's values instead of what may be used as a resource in a school to which we object. So that's basically what we have seen, but we haven't seen a full rejection of these forms. If you have experienced a rejection, please let us know. But more often than not, there's a two-way conversation that happens on what's going to be best for your child, and suitable for the teacher to also do what the teacher has to do in the classroom, while giving your child an alternative situation. So it's resulted in really, really good conversations, and people shouldn't feel bashful about it. They shouldn't be afraid. You have every right to submit these opt-out forms. Sometimes a school has their own internal opt-out form, but we suggest you supplement with the ones that we've put on our website. You can send certified mail just because then you have documentation that it has been received because somebody has to sign for it. You can follow up with emails, thank you, making sure you received the forms and that they've been added to the file. Do you have any questions? Offering availability to the teachers if they have any questions, just to keep that conversation going. Thank you for that question, Melanie. That's a good one. Oh, Lisa's got time on her hands. She's made some interesting comments. Any other comments or questions? Again, awakeil.com/forms. And then at the blog post this afternoon, we will have all of these slides. And you should be able to watch this live stream recording if you would like to. And we'll be doing more of these as, more tools are made available, as more feedback comes about, but we do hope to see the opt-out increase. And as we get the FOIA back from Chicago Public Schools on the detailed data of opt-out there, we will share it. And we hope that our policymakers get more involved in talking about the opt-out rights of parents and really talking about the issues of these agendas that are looking to be in conflict with the majority of Americans' values. The majority of Americans do not want to see their children sexualized. They do not want to see their parental rights disrespected. So this is a very unifying issue. It's a very centering issue. And if you take, if you question or if you disregard parents for these concerns, that's really, really harmful. It just is. And so we need to have really good conversations about this. And we hope that you will do that for your child's sake. So we are at 10:38. Thank you for joining us. If you don't have any other questions, I'll give it a couple more seconds. Stay tuned to awakeil.com blog, and these will all be available for you. Submit the forms, be an intentional parent, and onward for kids and for your community. Thank you so much for joining us, you guys. No more questions in the chat. Take care and be well. Happy Wednesday.